what is Judaism about, right? So to try to get a sense of it, this is from Steinberg, and this was written during the 40s, so it does not contain a reference to the country of Israel, but I added that, of course. So what is the essence of Judaism? What's Judaism about? It's a doctrine concerning God, the universe, and man. It's a morality for the individual and society. It's a regimen of rite, custom, and ceremony, right? We're going Saturday or Friday and Saturday we'll be at Port Angeles to a bar mitzvah. So there's some rite and some ceremony and some custom. It's a body of law. I mentioned the Talmud before. It's a sacred literature. You're certainly familiar with the Old Testament, or the Senior Testament, as I like to call it. Institutions through which the foregoing find expression. For example, synagogues, which you're sitting in one. The people Israel's central strand around which and about which the others are spun, but it's also the country of Israel. 3 or 4 of you have recently visited. So it's all those things. It's an 8-corded strand. And then I want to read you a piece from Kushner. Let's see where that is. And you can, I can tell you all these books if you ever want to know what they are. I picked out different things that I think are foundational or fundamental or revealing about Jewish culture and peoplehood. These fundamental ideas of Exodus provide the table of contents for our discussion of Judaism. The memory of redemption from slavery, that is, of course, the Passover story, and that is very central to Judaism. The concept of the covenant, the Brit, which is also extraordinarily central to Judaism. The notion of sacred deeds, sacred days, sacred places, and the promise of a homeland. So this is what Harold Kushner's kind of boils things down to. And then I'm going to read you from Telushkin. And you can't go wrong with Telushkin. So if you ever want to buy a book, anything about Judaism, you want to learn something about Judaism, and the name Telushkin's on the book, you're safe to buy it, pretty much. So Telushkin breaks it down a couple of different ways. But what I want to start with is the first question. There's a question, and it comes also from the Talmud. What is a person asked? What's the first thing they're asked before the heavenly court? When someone dies and they go to the heavenly court, what is the first question that's asked? We only have a few Jews in the room, but does anybody want to take a stab at what you might think in the Jewish culture you would be asked first, right? Assuming there is a heavenly court, and you died. What do you think you might be asked? Anybody want to take a stab at it, Geraldine? Were you as good as you could be? It's a good. You get lots of points for that answer. That was really right up there. Because a lot of times Jews will say, did you keep the Sabbath? Did you keep kosher? Did you, all these kinds of ritualistic Jewish practices. But that's not the essence. You're right. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Nobody? Okay, it's fair. The first question you're asked is, did you conduct your business affairs honestly? The first question, were you honest in business? Did you set aside regular time to study Torah? I got to work more on that myself. Did you work at having children? Did you look forward to the world's redemption? Those are the first 4 questions. But this is also a key to understand the culture, right? We can understand it through those questions. Micah, 8th century, so 700 BC-ish, 2,700 years ago. He has told you, O man, and you see this quote on numerous Reform synagogues, and maybe even other synagogues. He has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, to do justice, to love goodness, and to walk modestly, there's the modest again, to walk modestly with your God. Thus says the Lord, this is from Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu. Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, let not the strong man glory in his strength, let not the rich person glory in her riches, but only in this should one glory, in his or her earnest devotion to me, capital Me. For I, the Lord, act with kindness, justice, and equity in the world, for in these I delight. Someone went to Hillel, Rabbi Hillel, which is first century, is about a century before Jesus, and asked him to teach the Torah to him standing on one foot, right? And Hillel told him, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary." And Jesus says something very similar when they ask him later on, 100 years later. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is the major principle of the Torah, comes from the Talmud. So we have all these different kinds of distillations of Jewish thought. And we also have, there's 10 of them in Psalms, right? A person who acts righteously, who lives without blame, who speaks the truth in his heart, whose tongue speaks no deceit, who has not done harm to his fellow, and so forth and so on, who honors those who fear the Lord, who stands by his oath even when it is to his disadvantage, who has never lent money for interest, I have a problem with that, or accepted a bribe against the innocent. So these are all distillations. Isaiah distills it to 5 or 6. One who walks in righteousness, who speaks honestly, who spurns profit from fraudulent dealings, who waves away a bribe instead of taking it, who closes his ears and doesn't listen to malicious gossip, one who shuts his eyes against looking at evil. And later on, Isaiah says 2 things: do justice and carry out acts of righteousness. So Maimonides, who was a 12th century genius, said the purpose of the laws of the Torah is to bring mercy, loving kindness, and peace upon the world. So that gives us a basic kind of a foundation and a sense of what Judaism is about. Now, that's in theory, right? And you'll meet individual Jews that really follow that and act that way in the world. And you'll meet lots of Jews that don't. And the same thing I will say for the Christian world. And you know it's true, right? And it was the same way in the ancient Jewish world. When Jesus talked about hypocrisy, he was right on, because you could talk about it today. Same thing in different churches and in different synagogues. Maimonides taught the following, and then we'll get to something, I hope, a little more interesting. Actually, I have some things to hand out here in a minute. Maimonides taught as follows: if he speaks kindly, if a person, these are all written in the masculine, it was all written, it was male-dominated in a sense and written in the masculine. So we can convert it into the, if it's not masculine, it's not feminine, it's what? Gender neutral. Thank you. Who did that? Who said that? Great, thank you. If a person speaks kindly to his or her fellow person, it's hard to do it while I'm standing here on one foot, showing himself sociable and amiable with a welcome for everyone, taking insult but not giving it, that's not easy. Respecting them, even those who make light of him, such a person has sanctified the name of God. So this is just to give you a foundation and a basis. I want to hand these out. So if you want to hand out to the back of the room, this is my piece. This is why I wrote this. You might have an extra one? No. Okay, so we get it to Janet. I think you got this sort of foundation. So this is my piece. Oh, actually, no, I don't have one. This is a test of your generosity. Kathy gets an A. So this is why I love one of the things, or many of the things I love about being Jewish. It teaches me the following things. It informs me about the following things. First of all, I have a place in a 4,000-year-old and continuing story. So I'm a link in a chain that goes back to Abraham. There are 180 or 200 links in this chain. That's generations. So I really like that that's the case. My kids are the next link in that chain. It teaches me, it informs me how to live, how to die. Some of our, I guess for lack of a better word, technology around death is very powerful. Whenever someone died in hospice, and we would do certain prayers over them, and we would bathe them, and then we would escort them out to the hearse and sing while we did it. Every nurse at hospice would say to me, "When I die, I want you to do that for me." I heard it dozens of times. How to live, how to die, how to reach the divine. When to dance, when to sing, when to pray and when to mourn, when to forgive and when to love, what to eat and what to not eat, when to work and when to rest. So this gives me a lot of, it gives me a roadmap, right, for my life. So when it comes to Jews, is Judaism an ethnicity? We can vote on it. Is Judaism an ethnicity? Raise your hand if you think so. I think so. Someone can be ethnically Jewish. Is it a religion? Yeah. Is it a race? Yes, some people say yes. Is it a nationality? Can be. It used to be in Europe for sure. So let's look at some pictures, Josh, of some people, and you're gonna tell me if these are Jews or not. We'll vote on these too. Jew or not Jew? What do you think? So what do you think? Do they look Jewish to you or not Jewish to you? Raise your hand if you think Jewish. I got 3 votes. Raise your hand if you think not so Jewish. I got 6, 7, 8 votes. Okay. These are. When I look at that, I think he's like a Mexican bullfighter, right? He's got those amazing cheekbones, doesn't he? But he's actually Yemenite, and this is the Jewish wedding costume in Yemen, right? So these are Jews. I had a friend from Yemen in Israel, right? My daughter is named after him. Actually, her Hebrew name is after him. His name was Eli Yosef, and he had skin was the color of a walnut, and his teeth were the brightest white, and he had the biggest smile, and he had a beautiful voice, and he was killed in the Yom Kippur War. So, yeah, and when I went back to Israel after the war, I went back in November, and he was gone. So this is a Yemenite couple, and they're both Jewish. So what's the next image? So here's 2 boys. What do we think? Jewish or not Jewish? People are shaking their heads no. People are saying yes. So let's see. Yes, how many? 3, 4. No, how many? Okay, these are boys from, it used to be Soviet Georgia, now it's just Georgia. So these are boys from Georgia, right? And I actually have a couple of kippot like that, very nice big round yarmulkes like that. That was the style of Georgia. So the next one. Yes, they're Jewish. They are Jewish. Now who are these folks? I think they look like people who are, maybe they're collecting mushrooms or something. What do you think of these folks? Jewish, not Jewish? Jewish, yes? Yes. Yes? They're from Azerbaijan. These are Azerbaijani Jews. Jews have lived in Azerbaijan since the destruction of the first temple. For 2,600 years, there have been Jews in Azerbaijan, and there are Jews there today. Not a lot, but some. They get along very well with the Muslim rulers of the country. They're very accepted and respected in Azerbaijan. So the next image. Now, who's this guy? Do we think he's Jewish? Some people say yes. Anybody think he's not Jewish? Some people say not Jewish. Okay. So this is a Jewish man, a young man in Israel. He's in the Israeli army, and he's from Ethiopia. So there were there was a couple 100,000 Jews that came to Israel from Ethiopia, right? It's in Hebrew. It's Cush, right? And it's in the story of Purim. It says the king of Persia was the king from Hodu ad Kush, from India to Ethiopia, and there were Jews everywhere in his 127 provinces. So this is another Jewish person. So what's the next one? Who's this? Lisa Kudrow. Is she Jewish? Right. It's a slightly different look for a Jew, right, than I've been showing you. But is she Jewish? Yes. Okay. And the next one? Now, does anybody know him? I doubt it. This is probably the greatest lightweight of all time. He was a world champion for 8 years, which in those days, that was a big accomplishment. 1917 to 1925, he was the champion of the world. His name is Benny Leonard, right? Jewish boy from New York, right? That's Benny Leonard. And they say he was many people say he was the greatest lightweight of all time. So, the next one. Who's this guy, Salida? Anybody heard of him? Dmitry Salida, a pretty good welterweight. And he's an Orthodox Jew, too. He's not even, he's a serious Jew. And he's a, what? Oh, okay. David Zimmerman says it's his father's favorite boxer. So he retired a few years ago. But he was a pretty good junior welterweight. Well, junior welterweight's 139 pounds. And he stepped up, I think, to welterweight at one point. And he had a pretty good record. He was he was a champion for a while, not very long. And he was, I think, 38 and 3, something like that. He was a very good fighter. But we don't think of Jews as boxers, but in the 20s and 30s, there were a lot of Jewish boxers. And he was born in the Ukraine. And lucky for him, his family came to America when he was 8 or 9. So this is another image of what a Jew could look like. And who's next? So who are these 4 people? Now, someone said they were in Jerusalem recently. Do you recognize the place? You do? But do you know where this was taken? That's true, that's the Dome of the Rock, but I'll get to it next week, how we know this is exactly in the Torah, this spot. We know where this is. But this is the Has Promenade, and you have 2 Israeli soldiers of Ethiopian descent and 2 young women of Ethiopian descent pretending not to be interested in them, right? But the guys are clearly interested in them, right? So this is in Israel in Jerusalem, and these are 2 chayalim, 2 soldiers, they're both sergeants, and then you have, I don't know if they're their girlfriends, I don't know anything about them, but other than I know where they're from and who they are. So, and the next picture, and who's this? So, there's a lot of Jews in the jewelry business. Maybe, he's got a lot of rings, right? So, who's this? Sammy Davis Jr.? Is he Jewish? Yes. Was he born Jewish? No. So how did he become Jewish? It's true. He was in the hospital, and then he met a rabbi, and one thing led to another. And the question I have for you is he as Jewish as a convert as someone who is born Jewish? Say if you think yes, raise your hand. And if you think no, raise your no. Okay, so if he's a convert to Judaism, he is as Jewish as anyone, period. As anyone who's Jewish. And in fact, the rabbis consider him a higher level of Jew in a sense because he chose it. In other words, I was born into it. I had nothing to do with it, right? I was 8 days old, right? My parents, I got snipped, as it were. And, right, I didn't vote. I had nothing to do with it. But Sammy Davis Jr. made a conscious, informed, adult decision to be Jewish. So he's considered in some ways on a higher level. So the next one. So what do we think? What do we think about this? Who are these Jews? What do you think? Yeah, pretty much. No. So if you say yes, say yes, and then if you say no, Geraldine says no. Why, Geraldine? These are Southern Baptists that are trying on Jewish garments. You thought what? Oh, it's actually not. These are actually Southern Baptists that are trying on Jewish garments, and they're seeing what it feels like to pray as a Jew, right? So that's what they're trying to do. Because Jesus had fringes, they wanted to have fringes, right? So the next one. So what about these folks? Any ideas? Do we think they're Jews? Any ideas? Yes? No? There's a congregation in Chicago that's primarily black, a Jewish congregation. And there were some, not many, there were some Jewish slave owners. And just like Christian slave owners converted their slaves to be Christians, in some cases, Jewish slave owners converted their slaves to be Jews. I knew one in college. His family had been Jewish for 7 generations, and they had been slaves in the South. It was not common. There were not many Jews in the South, and a lot of Jews that were in the South didn't own slaves either. But there were a few, and this is part of that very small group. But this is a group of Jews and white and black Jews that are in a predominantly black Jewish congregation in Chicago. So what's the next one? Who knows who that is? This is someone who was born in Israel. His birth name was Chaim Weitz. He was born in Israel, lived there for the first 8 years of his life. And you'll recognize him in the next picture. That's him. Yes, that's Gene Simmons of Kiss. And this is his act, of course. This is but this is his shtick, as it were. This is what he does. And is he Jewish? Yeah, he's Jewish. Does he look Jewish? I'm thinking, I don't know, I have trouble with this one, let me tell you. So he's Jewish, yeah. So the next one, who are these two? These are intergalactic Jews, right? These are interstellar Jews. This is Shatner and Nimoy, right? So this is Captain Kirk and Spock, exactly. So Star Trek. And what he's doing, which I respectfully request you don't do, is how the Kohanim held their hands in the ancient temple when they blessed the people. And it's not done anymore. So, because we don't have the temple and so forth and so on, the Kohens still bless, but not with that hand motion. That's not anymore. So the same way we don't say the 4-letter name of God, we also don't do that. But he did it, and it worked in Hollywood, so we'll let him get away with it. What's the next picture? So here's a nice young lady. What do we think? Who votes Jewish? I got 3, 4. Who votes not Jewish? Nobody has any idea? Well, I don't know either. I just went online, I picked a nice looking young woman, and I just put her on the screen, and I have no idea if she's Jewish or not. And that's the whole point. Can you tell by looking? No, you can't tell by looking. So I don't know either. I'd like to think she might be, but I don't know. What's the next one? So who's this guy? Unlikely because he's with the Nazis, right? Who thinks he's Jewish? I can't sell one ticket in this room. Maybe. Who thinks he's not Jewish? His name is Werner Goldstein. And his father was Jewish, and his mother wasn't. And he had the Aryan look that the Nazis wanted. So they made a poster out of him. And after that, I don't know what happened. If they shot him, if they gassed him, I don't know what happened. But they made a recruiting poster from someone whose father was Jewish. Yeah. So the next one, and he's a good-looking guy. So I just have, right, white and black and brown and all together, and that's, basically, yeah, everyone holding hands and everyone being together and everyone unified. So that's the part about the Jews. And so can you tell a Jew by looking? Did some of those surprise you a little bit? Yeah, good. Okay, great. So there's one more I want to show you, our beginnings, if you will. And I used to have in here I don't see it anymore. Someone gave me a pointer, like a laser pointer, but I don't see it. So where's the next one, Josh? Okay. So this is the route. If you look at the bottom right is Ur Kasdim, which is now southern Iraq. It was the bottom half of Mesopotamia. And then you have the route, the dotted line is Abraham's journey going up to Haran and then coming down into Canaan. Before it was called Israel, it was Canaan. And then you have all of his journeys. He goes to Egypt and so forth and so on. So this is the area where the Jews are from, and this is the journey of Abraham, of Abraham Avinu. So I want to turn to the source book, if you will, the source book, which is the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, right? And we'll talk about Abraham for a little bit. Are there any questions so far? Oh, we have a few. Yes.
Apology.
What?
We're late. Sorry.
That wasn't a question. That was a statement. Well, we're glad you're here. So.
This is Harry, who lives down the street.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, Harry. I didn't get your name.
Esther?
Esther and Harry. Welcome. See, we needed 2 more people in that row, so it was perfect. So, good. And then somebody else. Yeah, Kathy.
So my question is, if a person is considered Jewish because their mother was Jewish, but let's say somebody doesn't have any, like Sammy Davis Jr., are his kids considered Jewish, or do they have to convert as well?
Oh, if he marries a Jewish woman, then his kids would be Jewish, right? And there's some exceptions in the Reform community about a kid whose father is Jewish, but he's raised exclusively in the Jewish religion. They accept him as Jewish also. So there's like anything you can ask me, there's going to be gradations of answers, and some Jews follow this and some Jews follow that. It's impossible to say. I mean, it is really impossible to say the Jews do this, or the Jews follow this, or the Jews believe this. There is always a great range within Judaism. There's a lot of it's a very broad range. So, and there was something else? Yeah, Deborah.
Curious on the same line. If a person who chooses to be Jewish is considered as Jewish as anybody else, what is the thought on somebody who chooses not to be Jewish?
Oh, okay.
And what about when they decide to be Christian?
Okay. Did you hear that in the back? Did you follow that? If someone who decides to be Jewish is considered Jewish, then if someone decides not to be Jewish, what happens with that? So in our tradition, if someone is an apostate, if you will, and leaves the Jewish world deliberately, and their mother is Jewish, they're still considered Jewish because they could, as long as they're drawing breath, they could decide to come back. And they could be forgiven, and they can ask for forgiveness and so forth, and they can do what's called teshuvah. They can come back. Lashuv means to return. They can do returnance, so to speak. So was there another question, I think. Wow. Oh, that's a whole nother topic. That's the Ner Tamid. It's in the, you'll find it in Leviticus. I mean, there's references to it in Exodus and Leviticus. The eternal light, so to speak. It stays on all the time. In the old days, it was a flame. Now, and then of course it was incandescent for 100 years, and now it's LED, I hope. So yeah, we change. We keep the same idea, but we change with the times. Josh? Yeah. I believe so. In other words, you're considered to have a Jewish heritage. And the way it works in Israel is If you were 1/8 Jewish, the Nazis would have murdered you for it. And that's Jewish enough for us to accept you. That's the way Israel does it. You're not considered a Jew in Israel, but you'll be a citizen of Israel. You can return under the law of return. That's my understanding. I'm not a specialist on Israeli law, but that's my belief. Yeah. Right. Right. To be honest, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that has been a challenge for 18 centuries. I mean, the first 2 or 3 centuries, many Jews, and there was predominant, there was in the first 40 years, 80 years, possibly 90 years of Christianity, almost all Christians were Jews. So, how did you deal with it then, and how do we deal with it now? But now the religions have split, and they've been apart now for 18 centuries, so it becomes a very different question. In my community, people are welcome, absolutely welcomed, with the one provision that they don't proselytize. That's in my community. Every community makes its own rules. And Orthodox communities, they would be less welcome probably than in a conservative or Reform community. It also depends on the person. It's a very nuanced kind of a situation. But it is and can be a challenge, and it's an interesting thing. And that's where, love your neighbor, love the stranger in your midst. The fundamental concepts are about loving and accepting and being open. But the Jewish experience in Europe was there was so much hostility that there's a lot of barriers and walls that have gone up over the centuries, which, less so in America, but we bring our baggage with us. When we came on the ships, we had bags, right? And we still have baggage, so yeah. So we're going to meet Abraham, okay? And then we're going to let me see how we're doing time-wise. Okay, we got half an hour to go. So all of a sudden in the Torah, in chapter 11 in Genesis, because we've had Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden and the Tower of Babel, and we've had all this stuff, which is everyone's history, right? Then we come to Abraham, which is beginning of Jewish history. And right in the middle, it just says all of a sudden, Vayechi Terach 70 shana, and Terach lived 70 years. Vayoled et Avram, and he begat. This is one of the begats, Avram. I imagine he didn't do it by himself. He had a little help. Et Nachor ve'et Haran. So he has Avram, Nachor, and Haran, and those are the 3 sons of Terach. And Haran died while Terach was still alive in Ur-Kasdim. And Avram and Nahor took themselves wives. The name of Abram's wife, and he was still Abram. He wasn't Abraham yet. He was Avram before he became Avraham. Before the letter Hey gets added to his name. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah means queen. Sarai means princess in Babylonian, which makes sense because they were from Babylonia, from southern Mesopotamia. And Terach took his son Avram and Lot, the son of Haran, and his grandson and his granddaughter, and so forth and so on. And they departed from Ur-Kasdim to go to the land of Canaan. Why did they go? I don't know. But at some point, there is an experience, there is an encounter between Abraham and God, right? And this is an Orthodox text, so it says Hashem, which means the name, which is how God is referred to often in an Orthodox text. Vayomer Adonai el Avram lech lecha, and the Holy One speaks to Abraham. Out of the blue, the Holy One speaks to Abraham. Lech lecha, you will surely go, me'artzecha, from your land, u'me'moladetecha, from your place of your birth, u'mibeit avicha, from the house of your father, el ha'aretz asher erecha, to the land that I will show you. And the land that was shown to him was the land of Canaan, or it later became the land of Israel, exactly. So this is our introduction to the encounter between Abraham and the divine, between Abraham and God. And there's a story that they say there's a story. So we go to the next slide, and I'll tell you what it is. There's an ancient midrash, which is a kind of a Jewish mythology, Jewish stories, that when Abraham was young, his father was a dealer in idols. He sold and bought idols, because that was how people prayed in those days, was to idols. And one day, his father came home, and all the idols were smashed, except the biggest idol. And this is kind of like the George Washington, and the cherry tree story. And his father says, Abe, what did you do? What happened here? Why did you smash all the idols? And Abraham, little Abe, said, Daddy, I didn't do it. They started fighting. And the biggest one beat up all the other ones, and he's the only one that's left, is the big one. And his dad said, Abe, come on. I wasn't born yesterday. Idols don't do anything. They can't fight. They don't see. They can't move. At which point little Abraham said, then why do we worship them? So one of the fundamental aspects of Judaism, Jewish culture, and Jewish thought is the concept of smashing idols, of crossing boundaries, right? I showed you on the map, crossing boundaries. He crossed the Euphrates River. He crossed the Iraqi desert. He crossed the Syrian desert to get to Israel. So crossing boundaries and smashing idols. Those are two really bedrock ideas of Judaism. So if that's true, we would see within Jewish culture over the next 3,800 years evidence of people that were willing to cross boundaries and smash idols. So let's see if we can find proof of that. The next slide. Who's this guy? Well, right. Well, we know it's Charlton Heston, exactly. So we know it's Charlton Heston, exactly. So hold on a second. I got to give. I hit this. So this is Charlton Heston. Was he Jewish? I don't think so. A lot of people in Hollywood are, but I don't think him. This is Moses, right? So was Moses an idol smasher? Was Moses a boundary crosser? Yeah, he sure was, right? He crossed the boundary from being an Egyptian prince to being a liberator of his people, right? He didn't smash the idol, but he smashed the Egyptian taskmaster, that's for sure, right? So he smashed idols and he crossed boundaries. What's the next slide? Who's this? It's a very Catholic-looking Jesus, right? So, was he an idol smasher? Was he a boundary crosser? So was he within the Jewish tradition? Does he fit within the Jewish tradition? Yes, he does. Okay, the next one. Who's this with the cigar? Sigmund Freud. Did he smash idols? So to speak, did he cross boundaries? Did he create revolutionary thinking that changed the world? Yes, he did, right? They all were involved in creating revolutionary thinking, revolutionary thought that changed. Did the thinking and how he behaved, did that change the world? Jesus? Right? Freud? Yeah. Who's next? Who's this guy? Karl Marx. This one looks like Rasputin a little bit. But same thing, revolutionary thought. You could love him or you could hate him. But did he change the world with revolutionary thought? Right? Billions of people were enslaved under communism, in part due to his philosophy. Right? Right? Das Kapital, and so forth and so on. So this is Marx. Was he an idol smasher? He was trying to smash capitalism, right? And was he a boundary crosser? Was he? Yes, he was. Okay, next. Who's this beautiful guy? Yeah. Isn't he just the sweetest, yummiest guy, right? Don't you love this guy, right? Was he an idol smasher? Was he? I didn't get a big yes to that. Was he a boundary crosser? Yes. What he also was an atom smasher, right? So we've gone from idol smashing to atom smashing, right? Right? But it still falls perfectly under the umbrella or under the whatever, under the sukkah, if you will, of Judaism, right? Revolutionary thought that crosses boundaries, smashes idols, challenges the status quo, and changes the world. And we haven't done it once, and we haven't done it twice. We've done it dozens and dozens of times, right? Jews oftentimes are at the very forefront of social movements, of revolutionary change. You'll find Jews almost every time. And it hasn't been for a few hundred years, it's been for thousands of years. So that's that part. So there's another part I want to get to, another basic kind of fundamental bedrock of how the Jews got to be the Jews and how our thinking impacts our actions too. And is there someone who wants to volunteer to read something in English for us? I think it should come up. You want to come up? Great. And this is a Hebrew book, so it goes this way. Okay? You're going to start where the yellow is, right? The men had turned, and this is where you end, but it goes this way. Okay?
Okay.
So, and here's the mic. Does that work for you? So this is Genesis. If you want to look at it at home later on, it's chapter 18, chapter 18 of Genesis. And I might stop you a few times,
Okay.
Esther, right?
Okay.
So
Could I do this? Is this all right?
you can take, yeah, however, I mean, just so they can hear you, okay? Oh, so I have to tell you where this happens. So this happens, right, after Abraham circumcises himself, he's visited by two angels. We're not sure if they're angels or men, it's not clear. They eat, but some people say they did eat, they didn't eat, whatever. It's interesting because Abraham's wife serves milk and meat together. Really interesting, right? Before the laws of kashrut, before the laws of kosher were given to the Jewish people, very interesting to read it. They had meat and they had milk together. So, and they were angels. Maybe they didn't eat it anyway. Who knows? But after that, he's recuperating by his tent, right? And he finds out that Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. And everyone who lives, and there were hundreds of people who lived there. Those are two very large cities down by the Dead Sea. I mean, large cities for those days. Okay? And this is the encounter with God. We'll hear about it.
Abraham intercedes for Sodom.
Wait. Here. The men had turned.
The men had turned from there and went to Sodom,
Can you hear everyone? Okay.
while Abraham was still standing before Shechem. Abraham came forward and said, "Will you also stamp out the righteous along with the wicked? What if there should be 50 righteous people in the midst of the city? Would you still stamp it out rather than spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people within it? It would be a sacrilege to you to do such a thing, to bring
It would be a chilul in Hebrew, it's chilul.
Hilo,
A sacrilege to you to do such a thing, to do something that is unjust when you are, right, the source of justice in the world. This is Abraham's argument to God, right? Is Abraham crossing a boundary right there? Right. He's absolutely crossing a boundary. God says he's going to destroy, she is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. What do you say? Well, okay, you're God, you want to do it. What am I going to say? But that's not it. And it wasn't even about that. It was really a test of Abraham. Will he say something in defense of those people? Right? That's the boundary that he crossed. And he set a standard for us to this day.
it would be a sacrilege for you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the righteous along with the wicked. So the righteous will be like the wicked. It will be a sacrilege to you. Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice?
Can you imagine the nerve? Now, imagine for yourself the nerve, in Hebrew, the chutzpah, to say that to the creator of the universe. Just hold on to that for a second. Direct challenge. You see it later, much later in Kings, when Elisha challenges King David. Right? You see that much, much later. But here, this is directly from Abraham Avinu, Abraham our father, to Hashem. Keep going.
And Hashem said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous people in the midst of the city, then I would spare the entire place on their account. And Abraham responded and said, behold now, I desired to speak to my Lord, although I am but dust and ash. What if 50 of the righteous people should lack 5?
What if they lack 5? He doesn't say, right? He doesn't go right, because ultimately he says 10, but he starts out just 5, and then he doesn't say for the sake of the 45, he says for the sake of 5. So not only is he a genius at negotiating, right? But he's negotiating with the creator of the world. Think about it. Keep going.
Would you destroy the entire city because of the 5? And
so what is that? You see how that puts God in a bad position? Right? You see? He's bringing back to the Holy One, right, some of the concepts that, I mean, in other words, righteousness and justice, he's laying it right back at God's feet. And it's incredible to me anyway.
And he said, I will not destroy if I find there 45. He further continued to speak to him and said, what if 40 would be found there? And he said, I will not act on account of the 40. And he said, let not my Lord be annoyed, and I will speak. What if 30 would be found there? And he said, I will not act if I find there 30. So he said, behold, now I desire to speak to my Lord. What if 20 would be found there? And he said, I would not destroy on account of 20. So he said, let not my Lord be annoyed, and I will speak but once, this once. What if 10 would be found? And he said, I would not destroy on account of the 10. Hashem departed when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you so much, Esther. So, 40, 30, 20, 10, and then God departs. All right, negotiation's over. It's enough. But what really happens here? Is this a situation where God's mind got changed, so to speak? Is this something the Holy One had in mind from the very beginning? Is this just a test of Abraham? What's happening here, right? You can look at it many different ways. But what it does is it comes down to us culturally that my great-grandfather negotiated with God. And that sounds so strange, maybe, to certain ears that never heard that idea. But it is my birthright. And it's my son's birthright in the back of the room, right? So I don't get intimidated when I'm buying a canoe from someone and I offer them a price and they make a face, right? Well, too bad. My great-grandfather negotiated with God. I can negotiate with you, right? I mean, this is something I have. This is very empowering. And it's also fundamental bedrock. Even a lot of Jews don't realize it's part of our DNA, so to speak. So, I want to ask one more thing. Let's see. So Sarai is his wife, and when Abraham encounters God, he adds the letter Hey to his name and becomes from Avram, Avraham, right? Now my mother's father was Avram. He wasn't Avraham. He was just Avram. So that's still a given name in Judaism. And Sarai, his wife, also adds the letter Hey to her name and becomes Sarah, or in English, Sarah, right? So we know her. So Sarah as mother. In other words, I want to read to you from a little more from the text, because what we have is the text. And we can make up stories about it. We can bring in all kinds of myths and legends about it. But I try to go right from the text And I stick with the text because that's what I know that I have. I'm on solid ground. So Abraham is promised a son. Is that true? Does anybody know? Abraham is promised an heir. Not only an heir, but that his descendants will be like the sand on the sea and the stars in the sky, and on and on and on, right? Is that true? In fact, I want to ask you something I forgot to ask you before. If I go back to page, it says here, sentence 2 and 12, Ve'escha lagoy gadol, and I will make you a great nation. So are the Jewish people a great nation? Yes. Ve'avarechecha, and I will bless you. Ve'agadla shemecha, and I will make your name great. Right? Ve'yebracha, and it will be for a blessing. Was Abraham's name made great? Did it happen? Did this come true? We're 10,000 miles away, right? 9 time zones, 10 time zones away, and almost 4,000 years away, and we know who he was. So his name was made very great indeed. Va'avarcha mevarechecha, and I will bless those who bless you. Umakalelcha e'or, and I will curse those who curse you. V'nivrecha v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama, and all the nations of the earth will bless themselves through you. And the Christians can count themselves blessed through Abraham, and the Muslims count themselves as well. I think they're latecomers, but nonetheless, Abraham was gone 2,400 years by the time Muhammad's born. But still, they claim that connection. The peace accords in the Middle East of late, the last 2-3 years, have been called the Abrahamic Accords, because everyone traces their roots back to Abraham. So we'll get to the mother part, right? So he's promised a son. He's promised a great inheritance that he'll have, not an inheritance, but he'll have offspring numbering in the millions, let's say. And how is that going to happen? Sarah is his wife, but Abraham is how old by this time? This time in the story, Abraham is 99 years old, and Sarah is 90. So it doesn't happen very often, even these days, that 90-year-old women have children. And this is the Jewish miracle birth story, right? There's later on a Christian miracle birth story. This is the Jewish miracle birth story. Va'adonai, I'm reading in from 21, just if you want to look at it later, Genesis 21. Va'adonai, which is the 4-letter word of God that we don't pronounce, we say Adonai. Va'adonai, pakad et Sarah, and God, it'll say in most translations, it'll say remembered, that God remembered Sarah. That would imply to me that God forgot Sarah. So I don't go with that. But pakad means really to account for, that God accounted for Sarah. Ka'asher amar, as was spoken, vaya'as Adonai, and God did l'Sarah to Sarah, or for Sarah, ka'asher diber, as was spoken. Vatahar, the Torah is sung, by the way. Like every word in the Torah has a note, a melody, it's sung. So, and she becomes pregnant. Vateled, and she gives birth, Sarah, Abraham, to Abraham. Ben Lizkunav, a son of his old age. No mention of her old age. She's 90, for crying out loud. La Moed, at the proper time, at the appointed season. Asher diberoto Elohim, as God had spoken to him. Vayikra Abraham et Shem beno, and God called the son's name, right? It called him Yitzchak, right? Hanolad lo, the one who was born to him. Asher yodalo Sarah, the one born to him from Sarah, Isaac. Vayamal Abraham et Yitzchak beno, and Isaac was circumcised ben shmonat yamim, at the age of 8 days, kasher tziva oto Elohim, as God had commanded. So he's the first one. Abraham is circumcised as an adult. But the circumcision is the covenant. That's the Brit. That's the sign in the flesh, right, of the covenant, right? The reward for this covenant is the land of Israel, as it turns out if you read the text. And this is the fulfillment of that piece. But who is the mother? Is Sarah. So how many sons did Sarah have? 1. So we come from Sarah. How many sons did Abraham have? I get 1 vote for 2 from Kathy. Deborah votes for 2. Janet votes for 2. Everybody's voting for 2. 1, you think? 2. Yes, this is true. Haben hayachidcha. It says haben hayachidcha, your only son. So there's an interesting midrash about that, because if you read it, it says, take your son. And Abraham says, which one? I have 2 sons. And God says, the one you love. And Abraham says, I love both my sons, right? And then he says, I'd have to read the text to get it exactly right. And then he says, Yechid, the only one from Sarah. Take the one from Sarah. So it's his only one from Sarah, right? It's not written in the text, but it's understood from the text, right? That it's the only one from Sarah. That was the one that was the miraculous one, right? That's why it's such an important test. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So I want to read to us something else. This is Genesis 25, in case you want to know. I think we're almost out of, we got 5 minutes. Abraham proceeded and took a wife whose name was Keturah, which many people say was, anybody guess? Hagar, exactly. I'll tell you a story about Hagar. So I had a friend from Morocco, and he had a daughter. And anyway, he was a beautiful professor, wonderful man. He came to Bend as a visiting professor, and I got to be friends with him. And he said something to me, his daughter named Hajira. And I said, oh, that's such a beautiful name. I never met a Hajira. He says, you know Hajira. You know the name Hajira. I said, I don't. I never met a Hajira. I never heard that name. You know Hajira from the Bible. I said, there's no Hajira. I know the Bible pretty well. There's no Hajira in the Bible. He said, Hagar. Oh, Hagar in Arabic is Hajira, just so you know. Abraham proceeded and took a wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him, are you ready? Count them. Zimran, Yokshan, Midan, Midyan, Ishbak, and Shua. 6 more. So 6 and 2 is 8. How many sons did Abraham have? 8. But the Jews come from only from Isaac, right? We come from Sarah. So just so you know. Sarah as mother, I think I have an image of her. Ta-da! She could be 90. What do you think? A youngish 90 with a baby, right? So I want to go a quick review. Can you tell a Jew by looking? No. Hold on, I'll get to the questions in a minute. So, smashing idols, right? Jews as idol smashers. Jews as smashers of atoms in the personage of Einstein. Boundary crossers, negotiate with God, and the centrality of Sarah as mother. We go on and on about Abraham. We don't focus enough on Sarah because all the Jews come from Sarah, but Abraham had lots of boys, lots of sons who had lots of children. So, before we get to questions, I want to ask something important because we're a small group. I think there's like 17 or 15? 19, okay. There's some on Zoom, okay. My question is this, and I'll explain to you why, and I'll be very transparent about it. If we meet at night at this time, which is what we're planning to do and what the schedule says, from next week on, and for every week, it will require security to be here, to open and close the building. That's what the temple requires of us. And that is, I basically pay for that, which means, and it costs roughly the tuition. So, would it be possible, let me know if it's possible for you to meet or to take this class if it were in the daytime. Just kind of raise your hand so I can see. A few people can, and some are shaking their heads no. How many people could not take it if it was in the daytime? We have Janet. It'd be probably the same day. We can make it any day, I don't know. But And one of each, well, on Zoom it doesn't, okay, so they might be coming, okay. Okay, so we'll keep doing it. I mean, if it was unanimous, I was going to change it, but it's not quite, so you can't make it in the day. Okay, got it. There's no way. Okay, oh, that's right, you were gone for 2 weeks. Got it, okay. So, and you couldn't take the class essentially, and it would inconvenience others, or not so much, to meet in the day. A little bit here and there, a little bit. Okay. What? Okay. Yeah.
But if there's some people here who aren't going to be able to come for a couple weeks, and you'll be able to come on Zoom. So that's
Yes.
something new that just.
Right. Right. Is the Zoom being recorded? Yes. Okay. So it is live and it's recorded, but I would say, shoot. Well, let's get some questions if there's questions in the meantime, and then we'll think about this a little more. Because, yeah, go ahead. She wants to know, Anne wants to know if we could meet somewhere else. Okay. Does anybody have another place we could meet? Janet? Okay. From 6:30 to 8, or if that could be arranged, or if you could get a key or something. Okay. Okay. Can you make sure that Judy has your email and we can coordinate? Okay. Okay. Is there anybody who would object to us moving it? To our moving it? Yes, no? This is Diane, yeah. I'm sorry for the confusion, but at one point it was a certain thing and then it got changed and then it's got changed. So I wasn't really clear on the whole thing. And the minimum I think is 4 hours that the security people will come, and I don't know, it just seems to be over the top for me. But then we would have to somehow arrange for the images to be able to be shown also wherever we went. So they'd have to have a way that I could show images too. So kind of raise your hand if you think that could work for you. If we had it, if the same class, same time, different place. Yes, Don, would that work for you? It would work. Okay, and it would work for you? Yes. So there's no one that it wouldn't work for. We'd have to be in touch with you and call you and send you an email and so forth if it's going to be somewhere else. But I would entertain that as a possibility. And that's why 19 brains are better than one, because I didn't think of that. So, any other thoughts about meeting and that kind of thing?
It was also great to be here the first time because I was very curious about seeing the synagogue. I haven't been in one recently.
Right. Isn't it beautiful? It's a nice, I mean, this took how many years, Joshua, to make this building? 20? Over 20 years. I mean, it was a hole in the ground for a long time. I saw it like that years and years ago, and it just all of a sudden it just came together, and it's just a miraculous building. I love it. So, were there questions about the class tonight? There are people that say that. That is an ancient commentary belief. You know, that is in the Midrash that it really was Hagar. That Abraham's second wife, Keturah, was actually another name for Hagar. And you know, if you read the Torah, if you read the Senior Testament, you know people have multiple names, right? Abraham is Avram, becomes Avraham. Sarah becomes Sarai. Yaakov becomes Yisrael, right? Jacob becomes Israel. So it's not an uncommon thing that a person has multiple names, right? I have 3 names in English, and I have 3 or 4 names, 2 or 3 names in Hebrew, right? I mean, so people have names, and you have different labels, and you're multiple faceted, right? We have many facets. So, are there any other thoughts or questions about tonight? No? Okay. So we'll sing one more time and then we'll kind of go. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, ay. Next week, God willing, as they say, we always say God willing. I never say I'm doing anything. I always say I'm planning. Especially with COVID, I'm planning next week. So we'll have music, and we God willing, we'll have, I know I have jokes planned. So we have 2 jokes, and then a couple years ago, people complained because they said, we want a joke at the end. And so there'll be 2 jokes at the beginning and 1 joke at the end, and they're fun jokes. And then we'll also have Jewish music, which spans, it's so broad, Jewish music from North Africa, music from the Middle East, music from South America, Jewish music from France, all over the place. So I hope you really will enjoy it. I'm so glad you came tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you in a week.